Bido is a researcher, author, and podcast host, best known for his show Mexico Unexplained, which explores the mysteries, legends, and paranormal phenomena of Mexico. He holds an MBA, a BBA, and an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. He also served as the San Diego chapter president of Mensa from 2015 to 2016. He's authored several books, including Mexico Unexplained, Mexican Monsters, The Cryptids, The Legendary Creatures of Mexico, as well as Mexican Miracles. He also has a podcast, Mexico Unexplained. His podcast dives into ancient mysteries, folklore, and legends, cryptids, as well as strange anomalies. Also covers religious curiosities and bizarre history. Robert Bideau, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on Newsworthy.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that very generous introduction.
Well, you earned it. You got more letters behind your name than I have in my name.
I think that goes for all of us.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, yeah, I got kind of carried away with all of that stuff. If I look back and I thought, I sacrificed my youth for all those pieces of paper that are currently on my wall right above me here. So,
well, that's better than what I was doing in my youth. I was producing offspring, so.
Oh, well, hey.
At a prodigious rate, yes.
I was trying to compete with Genghis Khan. It didn't work so well.
Well, he was the early Elon Musk. He thought that the repopulation of the earth was paramount.
Yeah. Well, Robert, we are super excited to have you here. And you told me right before we came on something that I was blown away with because of all of your stuff having to do with Mexico and Central America. I thought you lived there, but you live in Nebraska, right?
Yeah, I just moved here 10 weeks ago from San Diego. I lived near the border with Mexico. I always say, Sarah Palin would always say that she could see Russia from her kitchen window. I could see Mexico from my kitchen window, technically. No, but I moved from San Diego to Nebraska because I just got, not to get too deep into it, but I got kind of sick of Southern California and everything that went along with it. And, a lot of people were envious of me because I was living on a hill and in beautiful San Diego, just 12 minutes from the beach or whatever. But you know what? It's not what it's cracked up to be anymore. So I found a nice little piece of paradise here in Western Nebraska. And I moved here and everything's great so far. I haven't experienced a winter yet, but
yeah, I've been to San Diego once.
And it's been 33 years since I've seen snow, but we'll see how it works. So far, so good though.
Well,
nice.
I lived in just in Fremont very briefly, but when I lived in Idaho, we could see the storms that were forming over Wyoming, Montana, and that whole area. And all of those storms, every one of them go through Nebraska. So brace yourself.
Sure. Robert, you mentioned about living so close to Mexico. I know you spent over 30 years immersing yourself in the Mexican culture. Is that what actually first drew you to Mexico and its mysteries and legends?
Well, what happened is the story, it's kind of interesting how I kind of fell into all of this. I first started my whole journey with Mexico in 1989 when I was a student down there. So I was studying in a city called Morelia, which was in the central part, in the colonial heart of Mexico. And I was in the colonial heart of the city. And so there were legends and stuff there. But also, I really liked the arts and crafts of that area. So what happened is I went back to the States, got all those degrees that you mentioned, earlier. And then when I got out of school, I got a job with a major US corporation where they sent me to South America, to Brazil, and then also to Mexico City to work in their headquarters. And, like I said, I liked the arts and crafts. When I was down in Mexico and in Brazil, I was collecting, arts and crafts. When I came back to the States, they stationed me in Phoenix, Arizona, and at their financial resource center there. And I was still like working with banks in Latin America from the American side, but I got so sick of corporate America, and I really loved the whole arts and crafts that I was buying and stuff down there. I saw a business opportunity. And so I started a business. I told corporate America to get lost, and I started a business of importing arts and crafts from all Latin American countries in September of 1999. So next month, it'll be 26 years that I've owned this business.
Oh, wow.
And when I go down and I buy the stuff. I buy the merchandise myself. And someone in a Yelp review, when I had a retail store, I had a retail store for 10 years. In a Yelp review, someone called me the Indiana Jones of Mexican arts and crafts because I would go to the remote areas, and I still do go to the remote areas of these countries and buy the stuff. And so while I've been buying the stuff in these areas and continue to buy these things, I hear stories, legends. I hear things about creatures. I hear things about UFOs crashing, all of these different things. And one time when I was flying from Guadalajara to Phoenix, I was settling into my airline seat with a magazine called Muy Interesante. Very interesting. That's what it translates to. And it's a paranormal magazine in Mexico that is thoroughly researched. It's glossy. It has great pictures and all this stuff. And I'm looking at a story about agrogramas. Agrogramas are crop circles. I'm like, hey, I haven't seen these crop circles in American press, these forms, and the Mexican scientists they have their own commentary. And I thought, gosh, there's a lot of stuff, ancient mysteries and paranormal things that are in Mexico that never leave Mexico, that don't make it to the English speaking world. And so I had in the back of my head to start this podcast and this YouTube channel. And that was 2015 when I started things. In 2016, in January, I formally started the YouTube and the podcast. And I have a never-ending supply of stuff because there is so much stuff down in Mexico that, like I said, it doesn't cross the border, doesn't make it to the English-speaking world. And some of this stuff is so localized that if I were to say something like to a Mexican who lives in Mexico City, oh, have you ever heard of the Tlahuelpuchi? They'll say, what? What's that? Well, that's the blood-sucking witch that's in the rural areas of Mexico's smallest state. And people in the capital city of that state haven't even heard of that before. So by going down and buying these crafts and stuff, that's when I've accumulated all these stories, and that's the beginning of all of this. And it continues because now I have a dual purpose when I go on these trips. I'll ask the driver or whoever I'm interacting with, is there a creature, or is there some legend or whatever? And people will always tell me things. And so that's the basis in a roundabout way of how I came about with all of this stuff.
Very nice.
One thing that Jerry and I and Brett very recently learned is that if you get people into a position where they believe they're safe, that they're where they're not going to be judged, they are very open to tell their stories. We literally just came back from the Bigfoot Festival of Hocking Hills up in Ohio Sunday, and very, very much the same thing. People there either believe or want to believe, and we're very willing to talk and tell us their stories. We came away with something like 25 arable stories and probably talked to 100 people whose stories were very real to them, but were, obviously 30 seconds, or they saw something, or they heard something. But very open to talk.
Yeah, and you know how I do business? I speak the language, I speak Spanish, and so that puts me at a great advantage when talking to these people, especially in the rural areas where English is not spoken that much, and so they see a gringo coming down there and our language, that immediately bridges a lot of gaps. And so that's been helpful for me. And you're right, people will open up, and it's amazing the stories that I've heard, and different places I've gone to because of the stories I've heard. So if you have time, I got a lot of stories.
Well, we got time.
That we do.
I do have a question because I've never had the opportunity to ask somebody who may know firsthand. But one of the areas about Mexico that has always intrigued me the most is the Zone of Silence. And I'm going to butcher the name. It's Mambimi?
Mommy P. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
there you
mop,
go.
no, Moppy Me Zone of Silence. Yeah. It's
Del
in the
Rio
northern
Durango.
part of Mexico. It's like the Bermuda Triangle.
Right.
And I've always said on almost every interview I've done, I've always said that Mexico has the paranormal counterpart of anything you can think of. There's a Bermuda Triangle. There's a Loch Ness monster creature. There are two Bigfoot creatures. There's all of this stuff. And so their Bermuda Triangle is this Mapimi, environmental protected zone. And I found, it's interesting, I can't find it anymore, but in 2015, I found a diary of a park ranger because it's an ecological zone. And it's a piece of desert, okay? And where weird anomalies happen, there have been reports of strange creatures, black triangles in the sky, things like that, missing time. The appearances of the Nordics, the aliens, which are very popular in Mexico. The Nordics are like the number one, even before the Greys in UFO lore in Mexico. But this, I found online a diary of a park ranger for that park, and the park ranger disappeared. And somebody took the diary and put it online. It was in Spanish, and I translated a lot of it and bookmarked it and everything. And every trace of that diary is gone off of the internet now.
Ooh.
So, yeah. And what he did is he described all of the things that he was seeing, the black triangles. There were things going on in the office where he worked, like computers were spontaneously combusting. There were things that were appearing, burn marks were appearing on the wall. He saw strange plants when he was out in his patrols and things like that. And then he disappeared. And
Wow.
when
Isn't
there
that-
was a shift change, the person who came to relieve him saw his car there, and there was no trace of the guy. So, yeah. And now there's no trace of the diary online either.
Jeez, that's creepy.
One thing I was going to ask, so you said that in Mexico they have a counterpart to everything that we kind of have in America. So I guess the first thing that came to my head was, which came first, or did they happen at the same time, or is it something like where America has this story and then Mexico kind of built stories afterwards, or is it something that they can trace back to a
Before
long
us.
time ago? Yeah, long time
Well,
ago.
it depends on what it is. Okay. There's a dogman creature, for example, that's popular now. Dogman, you
Right.
hear that everywhere. And even someone asked me in a live interview, have you heard of Dogman battling Bigfoot? Someone's got to do an AI, with all this AI technology that's out there, someone's got to do an AI video
I'm sure
on
it's coming.
Bigfoot battling Dogman. But like there's a Dogman creature that's in Mexico that can be dated reliably back to like 2000 BC,
Right.
thousands of years old. Because when the Spanish arrived in Mexico, they encountered living, breathing civilizations. And they also encountered ruins, that are still there, and artifacts that have illustrations on them and writing that we can read now.
Wow.
And so some of the legends can go back thousands and thousands of years. Others are more modern, like Los Becks. Becks. Now, what's that stand for? B-E-B-E-K. Beck. They show
Australian for beer.
They show up at your door and they're asking for water or directions, and don't let them in. It's the black-eyed children.
Oh, wow.
B-E-K, Los, and then they put the article for the in front, Los Becks. So the black-eyed children started showing up in Mexico in the early 2000s. So that's an example of something showing up later, okay? But then there are like the two Bigfoot creatures, the Sisamite, the one that is in the jungles in southern Mexico. There are illustrations and legends that go back thousands of years. In fact, there's an artifact that goes back to the Olmec civilization, which is the mother civilization of ancient Mexico, the very first civilization. And it dates back to about 2500 BC. It's a sculpture called the Olmec ape. And it's that people think it's a representation of a Bigfoot creature. So,
Wow.
That's impressive.
Well, I know one thing that has always interested me. So I'm Catholic, and so obviously Our Lady of Guadalupe. I saw that you wrote a book called Mexican Miracles, and you mentioned going to Mexico City. I've always heard that, I guess from further away, Mary looks a certain way, but then as you walk closer, the image changes. Did you get to see that?
well, you know what? Some people say that, and then some people think that she's crying or she's smiling at them. That's another thing. And how that basilica is set up is that you stand on a conveyor belt and you
Okay.
get this people transport to go
Right.
by her,
I
but
gotcha.
it all depends on some people. There are stories of her changing expressions and things like that, and there are other apparitions in Mexico where the Virgin is crying or what, and you've seen that in other parts of the world too. In Europe, statues
Right.
cry blood and stuff like that. So there are a lot of stories like that in Mexico too. And with Mexico, it's interesting. There's a cultural component to all of these things. And I experienced one once, okay, not in a religious way, but whenever there's a religious apparition or something that happens, then people gather around and try to make money off of it. Like you'll see an old lady selling gorditas, which are little like hot pockets type things, or there'd be balloon sellers, people selling toys, whatever, at these apparition sites or whatever. And for a non-religious example of that I was experiencing is I was in a little town in the back country of Michoacan, the state of Michoacan in central West Mexico. And I always hired drivers to take me around to these villages and stuff, and we load up the back of the truck with stuff, right? And so we were driving through this small town, and we heard that there was a flying saucer landing site in somebody's cornfield. I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so we headed out to first of all, we only passed it, and we passed it, and I saw I knew where it was because of all the vendors and stuff. Okay. Because they always pop up, but I didn't get to go to the actual site. They were charging like 25 pesos to admission or whatever. See, there's the other commercial angle too. And the driver, I said, I'll pay for your admission, whatever. I can't wait to see where the flying saucer supposedly landed. And the guy said, no, I'm afraid of radiation. And so
Wow.
I was like, really? Come on. It's not going to hurt you. Look at all these people who are out here. And so I didn't get to go because the person who was driving you know.
Say stay in the car for an hour.
Yeah, so anyway.
So, if you were to pick one lesser known miracle or religious phenomena in Mexico that you think deserves more attention, what would it be?
Well, there's an interesting wow, that's hard to say. Probably the Black Christ of Chalma. Now, that's nobody has ever heard of that one, right? Well, during the evangelization of Mexico, when the Spanish arrived, they were outnumbered big time, right?
Right.
And they had to convert these native people pretty quickly. And it was very interesting that a lot of miracles started happening at this time. And some people, you can be a faithful person and say, yes, it was God communicating or whatever. Or you can say, well, this is just kind of propaganda and manipulation, right?
Sure.
But be it as it may, these things happened. And so here is one good example, the Black Christ of Chalma. It's a local pilgrimage site in central Mexico, and it used to be the pilgrimage site to a god, a pre-Columbian god. So it already was a place that was well visited by people. And they were worshiping in this cave a black monolith. And there was, I think it was the Augustinian brothers who came to that area, who went to that area. And they were appalled because there was blood in the cave and everything. And there was this black monolith, that they were praying to. Something out of like a 1960s science fiction movie, right? 2001 or something. So they're praying to this black monolith, and then the monks get together and say, this can't go on. There's blood everywhere. There were sacrifices going on in the cave. And so the monks got together and prayed. And then supposedly during the night, that monolith exploded. And in its place, with all the shards of obsidian around, was a black Jesus, a black Christ. And that black Christ is still in the church in Chalma today. And it's one of the major pilgrimage sites in Mexico. You don't hear about it. It receives millions of people a year, but you don't really hear about that. So that would be one of the lesser known sites that I would consider to be major. And the story behind it's fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Many times you have said that different areas, certainly no one outside of Mexico know about it, but even still within Mexico, there are plenty of places that this group knows about, this group's never heard of. Why is that? Ultimately, like what's is it just that it's not covered on the news? Is there very little interest in that?
Or are they very secretive about it?
Exactly.
Well, you know what? I'd say all of the above. The secretive part of it, that's a big part of it. And then for years and years and years, communications were not, very good. If you were in a rural area, you might not even have a telephone, heading out there. But now with the internet, like I had mentioned earlier, this witch, the Tlahuelpuchi, that's in Tlaxcala, in the rural areas of that tiny state. Now people in India, in the UK, all over the world are hearing about it if they go to Mexico Unexplained and they click on the show where I talk about it. And so now it's all over the place with certain things, but still, I'm still fascinated with the local legends that are still very local. And I get people contacting me all the time. And, people call me professor and all this stuff in the comment section. They defer to me that way. And I'm not a professor. And I do not have a PhD. I'm not Dr. Biddo. All of those letters that you read out, not one of them is a PhD. So I can't claim that. But as somebody who's disseminating this information, I have the right to learn too,
Sure.
And so I always ask the audience, do you have stories? And because, not to get political or anything, the border between the United States and Mexico is very fluid, and it always really has been, right? So you have people who are raised on the American side of the border who have their grandma or whatever down in some tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, and then they were sent there every summer to live with grandma. And then there's a big hairy creature that lives in a cave outside that village, and no one ever hears about that, outside that area. And then they tell me about it, and then I go and investigate.
That's neat.
But so it's still going on, even in this age of interconnectedness that we're in. There are still local legends. That's why I keep telling you, or I keep telling everybody, really, that I have an unending source of material, because I have 420 shows that I've done so far, not including
Wow.
my 600 shorts that I've made. So full length shows, I've done 420. I have 3 books, and I'd say there's probably 10 times more material I can cover.
Wow.
So I'll be 90 years old and I'll be doing this. And I think by that time I'll have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, the
Wow.
way that it goes.
By the time
I
we
get
reach
4 a day, and I figured in 40 years I'll have 100,000. I'll get that coveted plaque,
There you go. There you go. Jerry is almost 90. How does it feel when you're almost 90, Jerry, and you're trying to learn stuff?
Well, according to you, I'm older than Moses, so I think I passed 90 several millennium ago. Sad part is I'm only 10 years older than him, but yeah, he loves to say that I'm older than dirt itself.
And what's funny is Steve shows his age a lot more than Jerry does
Yes,
sometimes.
he does.
I don't know
Like
what you
tonight.
speak of.
Question for you. You were talking about all these interesting stories. It brought up a question.
Sure.
If you were to retire next year, and let's say you hit the lottery, you're incredibly rich, you've got unlimited resources. I'm sure there's a lot of these stories that you've come across that you would like to investigate further. If you had unlimited time, unlimited resources, what's the first one that you would go investigate?
Well, if I had unlimited time and unlimited resources, I wouldn't stop in Mexico. Like I said, my business encompasses all of Latin America. And so I would do Mexico Unexplained, I do Brazil Unexplained, I do Bolivia Unexplained. I would do all of these countries because there's a lot more stuff out there.
Sure.
And in my last interview, someone had said that they went to Venezuela, and he asked me, it was some call-in show or whatever. He asked me, "Have you heard of this creature or whatever in Venezuela?" And I'm like, "No." I concentrate on Mexico, and I go to these other countries and stuff. But
Right.
if I were to do, if I had unlimited time, I would do a show for the major countries because there's a lot more stuff to investigate. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's what I would do. I'd be a content creator full time. I wouldn't. It would be a heck of a busy retirement, I think.
Yes,
A lot
yes,
of
it would.
traveling.
But a very interesting one.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these you're getting firsthand. You're getting like face to face. You're a lot of these stories you're not getting out of a Wikipedia page or something like that. You're actually in the town talking with these people. So
Yeah.
how often do you try? And this is just from just going and getting those arts and crafts and bringing them back to the States.
Right.
Do you now, as you've gotten your podcast started, do you go there specifically for things like investigating different stories, or are you still going back and forth for the arts and crafts as well?
Well, I haven't had a buying trip in quite some time, and I was scheduling one for the end of this month. But when I was scheduling it, there was a lot of unrest in Mexico against Americans as a backlash to what's happening with ICE and all of this stuff. It was during those LA protests and things that I don't think it made the news in the United States, but Americans were getting targeted in Mexico.
Oh wow.
So I had to cancel this trip that was going to be like next week. And what I was going to do on that trip was I was going to map out a tour that I was going to do.
Oh wow.
And so what hopefully I can do this next year is I was going to take people on tours of all of the different things that I talk about. And I used to, when I had a retail store, I did take tours of Mexico before. So I've done it before. But
Nice.
yeah, I was going to go down and do more investigating than craft buying.
Right.
You had mentioned crop circles down in Mexico. It's one of our favorite topics because,
Covered it 2 or 3 times.
yeah, and the reason is for every one that's fake, there's one that pops up, creeps up that just goes beyond fakery, if you will. How big of a thing is that down there as far as, is it a one-time thing or is it a recurring thing? Is it a every growing season does it happen, or was it just like in a vacuum, if you will?
It seemed like it was popular. Crop circles were happening in the early 2000s more than now. And yeah, it's hard to tell. I don't think that they were recurring in the same spots. I
Gotcha.
think they were going, here and there, and some of them were faked and were investigated. And then, just like here or in England, it's hard to tell for some of them. And then others, there's no explanation. And
Right.
so that fated article that I was reading that really sparked my whole idea of Mexico Unexplained. That article didn't really come to any conclusions as to what these were. And the article did expose some fakes. So, yeah, it's the same sort of thing that we've seen in the US or England or wherever they're happening.
I know in America we have a lot of conspiracies on like the government trying to hide some of these things that happen. Is the Mexican government is there conspiracies similar to that where they're trying to,
Cover things up.
right.
Yeah, sure. Kind of like the Smithsonian dumping giant bones and into the
Right.
Atlantic and anomalous artifacts and stuff like that. Yeah, the Mexico has the National Institute of Anthropology and History. INA is the acronym in Spanish. And it's based in Mexico City. And there is a branch office in every state in Mexico. And if there's something that pops up that's anomalous, they are there. The National Institute of Anthropology and History is right there. And they've shut down digs, and they've refused permits for certain people in certain situations. Like in the state of Guanajuato, the southern part of Guanajuato, there is a town called Acámbaro, and people were digging up dinosaur figurines. And the National Institute of Anthropology and History heard about it. They were there immediately and they shut it all down.
Wow.
But there is a museum, and I've been to it. A German farmer who relocated to Mexico was finding the figurines on his land also. And he started a museum. Waldemar Julsrud was the guy's name. The Waldemar Julsrud Museum in Acámbaro. You
Say
can
that
look
3
that
times
up.
fast.
And it has dinosaurs. There's even a figurine of somebody riding a triceratops. Okay.
Wow.
And young Earth people believe that this proves, these figurines prove that dinosaurs coexisted with people, because why would people be making dinosaur figurines? And some of them have been carbon dated to 2,000 years ago. So,
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at some of these online right now. They're pretty incredible.
yeah. So,
Yeah, there's like a person
yeah.
riding
So,
a
but
triceratops.
that's an example of INA coming in and shutting down, because in this outside this town, they were finding more of these figurines. And, beyond what that German guy found on his property. So then they just shut it down. And that happens a lot. And it's interesting that each state in Mexico at least has one office of this
Right.
this institution, if not multiple offices.
Right.
And they can mobilize almost like the military. They're on the spot.
Incredible.
So I have a non-Mexico, but definitely southeastern United States Mexican border question that you may or may not be able to answer.
Okay.
We are prepping to do an episode on the lost Egyptian cave system in the Grand Canyon. Have you heard anything about that? Do you know what
Yes,
I'm
I
talking
have.
about?
I have my own theories about that. And they're not popular, and people hate me for them.
Really?
I lived in New Mexico and Arizona for a big chunk of my life. I grew up in New Mexico, and then I lived in Arizona for 14 years. And I heard stories about that. I heard stories from people who supposedly their grandpa went in there and saw the stuff, right? But it was these sightings, these reports were coming out of the early 1900s, okay? And I don't know if you know anything about Mormonism, the Mormon religion. They believe that the ancient Americas were visited by Christ and Israelites and people, biblical people. So I think my theory is that Mormons were kind of embellishing things to give justification or to prop up their faith as evidence of their faith. And that's where this whole thing came out of. And I think that area where you can't go to now, where those caves are, it's just very treacherous. I've been to the Grand Canyon a couple of times, and that part of the canyon is hard to get in and out of. And I can see, somebody going down there and having to be extracted by helicopter, So there could be practical reasons behind why people can't go there now. And there could be a very simple explanation as to why that whole story came about 120 years ago.
Wow.
Sure.
Well, Robert, what is your website and your podcast, man? Give yourself a huge plug here as we wrap up. And quite honestly, we could talk to you for another 20 hours. So, other than the fact that, we'd probably have to use the bathroom and stuff.
Well, gosh, I was about to say we're done already. I was just getting warmed up here.
Exactly.
No,
we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to come back too. And I like the format of 3 people asking questions, and that's great. Because there's never a dull minute. There's no downtime. So, if you go to MexicoUnexplained.com, that's my website where you can see there's no paywall there at all or anything. You have access to transcripts of every show that I've done, and you can read all of the stuff. And then that's where you can jump off to other things. Like I have merch, I have the books. You can get an autographed copy through my website. That's really the only place where you can buy it, or my Etsy store for my business. I have books too. But if you just go to MexicoUnexplained.com, that's a good jumping off point. And YouTube, yeah, you just go to Mexico Unexplained, and I'm all over the place there. So, yeah.
Well, Robert, I absolutely loved having you on. Can't wait to
Absolutely.
get you back. When you can make us be quiet and listen to you, that's saying something, because Gary's got a really big mouth.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I'd love to be on again. Yeah, it was my pleasure.